This is 26.2 Snapshot 6. Let's go ahead and create a new world. I'm going to do creative and peaceful. No hostile mobs and only some neutral mobs spawn. Okay, sounds good. I have the seed I found earlier. I'll put it in the description. So I'm standing here. Not sure what this white line is. That's something new to me. But if I look at latest.log and we scroll down a bit, we are getting constantly spammed with skipping entity with ID Minecraft zombie. So hold up. Difficulty is peaceful. What's going on here? Skipping entity, where could this come from? If we search for this, we can find it being logged from entity type or from client packet listener. So we see this handle add entity for client bound add entity packet. We see skipping entity with ID here, and we can look at entity type to see create here to see how it logs. So I have the compilations. I'm comparing snapshot 5 to snapshot 6 here. These files are identical. Entity type is identical and client packet listener is identical. We don't see the same issue in 1.21.11 though. I'm not getting spammed with logs. My difficulty is peaceful. On the left I have 1.21.11. On the right I have 26.2 snapshot 6. We see the exact same logic for get, create, display entity. And both of them have an empty block here, which is kind of weird. So let's check out load entity recursive. Let's go to load entity recursive. We see a call to load static entity, and we see a call to create. We see a call to entity type.create. And here we can see the underlying difference. In 1.21.11 we had not enabled return null, otherwise create the entity with a factory. In 26.2 snapshot 6, we're actually checking not this can spawn level and returning null, otherwise creating the entity. This dot can spawn, you can see it right here. It just checks if it's not enabled and if it is allowed and peaceful or the difficulty is not peaceful. So why does it fall apart in the latest version even though we're checking can spawn here? Looks like it's a pretty straightforward error. Since we're returning null, we're setting display entity to null, and then if it's null, then we try to set it again. But why does this not happen here? Well, basically without the difficulty check, we would always return the entity for the spawner. So if the spawner was meant to spawn a zombie, then regardless of difficulty, we would return that entity and set it. Here instead, we're checking this .can spawn, which checks against allowed and peaceful or the difficulty. So if it's not able to spawn, like I said, we're returning null and setting that value to null, and then checking it again and checking it again and checking it again. So why would we do this? For rendering, I don't think we should ever check the difficulty, in my opinion. It doesn't make sense to. The spawner always has the same data. It's not going to just magically change to be a pig spawner just because you change the difficulty to peaceful. So why are we checking the difficulty here? What was the point of this? We have an entity spawn reason. We're using load here, but we also have a spawner reason, but that's for when the entity itself is actually spawned. So we should have something like display. I'm using a mixin to overwrite the logic here, so I'm basically injecting my own code to do my own check here. Creative, peaceful, same seed. All right, so we're in the world. We're not being spammed. Let's go into spectator mode. We have a spawner here. So even though we're in peaceful, we are creating the entity type to display in there, and nothing's going to spawn. I can check my difficulty. I'm still in peaceful. I'm in survival mode. Nothing's spawning, and this is good. So we only create that display entity because we're only using that create call or that display entity, which is hilarious because you would think they would use that as like an authoritative gate in a sense to like everything calls to that, but that's not the case. We see here finalize spawn, level, get current difficulty at, and then entity spawn reason spawner, all under server tick here. So it's a bit weird. We still have the call to load entity recursive, so we still create the entity as a default, but actual spawning happens with this finalize spawn, get current difficulty at here. This is something small, totally separate, 3 R's in the word override. I just thought it was a funny typo that I found while I was modding. Very aptly titled, magma sulfur cubes. Sulfur cubes with magma damage other sulfur cubes, as well as ones with magma. So I totally understand them damaging other sulfur cubes that are not magma. However, if you have 2 magma block sulfur cubes, what do you expect to happen? I mean, I wouldn't expect them to start hurting each other personally. We see the logic here, apply contact damage. For every contact damage listed in contact damages, which is assigned via the archetype, we hurt the other entity. When we're registering the hot archetype, we see optional of contact damage, damage types, hot floor, but we don't see any check against that if we are a certain type, or any check against certain damage types. I can understand why this might have been overlooked, because you might have damage types that are more common, like magic or cactus or cramming or whatever maybe, where they should be technically harming each other, but if they're both superheated blocks, I feel like they should be resistant to that somehow, in a sense. We could approach this 2 ways. We could check for specific damage types. Otherwise, what I'm doing here is collecting the types from the damage types that this cube can do, and then checking against the type that's trying to hurt this sulfur cube, and then if the types that this sulfur cube can damage with contains the type that we're trying to be damaged with, then we return false. Let's try this. There we go. So they're not damaging each other anymore. This is kind of funny because it's related to what we were looking at in the beginning. Piglins continuously make a sound while trying to zombify in peaceful difficulty. Okay, why would that happen? Piglins have a play converted sound. That happens when their time in the overworld is greater than 300 ticks. So after 15 seconds, we start spamming this sound, and then we call to finish conversion, which should quote unquote transform our entity. So we have this call to this dot convert to, which is in mob, which does this logic here first, which calls to convert to, which calls to convert to. We see this here. Entity entity type.create. Oh my god, we just saw this earlier. This is going to return null if the difficulty is peaceful and they're not able to spawn in peaceful. So this returns null, then new mob is null, so we return null when we're converting. So this is returning null when we do .convert2. And we never use the return type here, but as a side effect, this is supposed to change the entity that it's mutating. We see this tracked with conversion params here. So in my opinion, is immune to zombification should probably have a call to the difficulty. If the difficulty is peaceful, then we are immune to zombification. Right now, that's just a value that you can set on that entity. Hot sulfur cubes cause armadillos to uncurl. We get steps to reproduce and the expected result. What was the intended behavior behind this originally though? If we set block here, I'll set it to a magma block. The armadillo wants to uncurl so that it doesn't get damaged. The intended behavior being that armadillos can run away from magma blocks that are damaging them. Now, sulfur cubes with magma blocks inside of them do the exact same damage type. So this guy is scared, we push him, and he got up and scuttled away because he got scared by the magma block damage. So we see this logic in actually hurt. If the damage source is of damage type panic environmental causes, then we do the rollout. And then if we look at that tag, that includes hot floor, which is the same damage type that the sulfur cube is doing because it's the hot archetype. So we have damage source, which is the source of the damage. We check that out. We have nullable fields for causing entity, direct entity, damage source position. So we have this damage with damage type and attribute to source. Now the only issue here is that for hot, we're setting this to false for attribute to source. So this should be set to true. I feel like, because if it is coming from an entity, then it's not an environmental cause. It's direct damage from an entity. So we should be doing this logic, but source.getEntity is null because it's nullable, and the hot archetype is not doing the attribute to source as true. So when the armadillo is damaged by the sulfur cube, all it sees is hot floor damage. It doesn't see hot floor damage from an entity. Geyser's force goes through some transparent blocks. When potent sulfur geyser goes off, the force that pushes up entities goes through glass, even if the particles were stopped by it. So let's check this out. I have an armadillo in my funnel. I have glass under him and he's in water so he doesn't take fall damage. And you see he's still launched in the air even though there's glass separating him. So if noxious gas is able to spawn, then we do all of this logic. So we have this call to have line of sight. This is calling from the source block, which is where the noxious gas is spawning, going to the eye position of the entity to be launched. And we're doing block.visual here. So we have collider, but we chose to do visual. Maybe this is on purpose. So here I'm overriding that same logic and using block.collider instead. So now we see the entity is not being launched because there's a block blocking that. So the particles aren't fixed. That's a separate issue. We also see some particles were blocked, but not all of them. Most of the geyser plume particles that I touched on in the last episode were stopped in this little gap, but some of them did make their way through. We can check out geyser plume particle. We see here it starts with a y delta of 0, and we see a start y equals y, and a max y of start y plus plume height minus 1. We see gravity is negative for initial propulsion, which is derived from the amount of water blocks. This is the main logic we're looking at for tick. We see if y delta is less than 0, and our y position is less than the max y that it can reach, we're still at the exact same position. We update our lifetime. We see our y progress linear being calculated, which is just 0 to 1 from the distance that it should start at to the distance it should stop at. So if it was at the bottom, it would be 0. At the top, it would be 1. We see our exponential progress used for gravity, which is derived from our original y progress. But this here, this is what actually affects the plume moving upwards.